It was the middle of autumn, and all the trees were bare as we drove down the wooded area of the highway, a peaceful drive like every year when my wife Mandy and I would head east from New Jersey to see her parents in the next state over. We would come across car accidents and the occasional poor animal that didn't have the mind of caution of the road. Few times I had to do what was right and put the poor things out of their pain and suffering. Don't understand why people would just leave them like that. Saddening and cruel, but why people would just leave them like that. Saddening and cruel, but I did what I had to do. This one particular trip, which was last year, just happened to be one of the most memorable times. Not because of visiting my wife's parents, but what we encountered on the way there is what scarred us. Driving while the sun had begun to set, radio blasting alternative rock while Mandy had her feet on the dashboard, relaxing and playing some mediocre game on her phone. The roads seemed more desolated of any other cars, which was just how I liked it. The setting was just so perfect and relaxing with being able to see the road ahead perfectly. She sighed, "Not another one," and I looked back at her and rested my head on the steering wheel. Yep. She knew what I was going to do, so she got out of the car as I popped the trunk to get a blunt object out of the trunk. I could see her slowly approaching the poor animal as I peeked around the back and pulled out a tire iron. As I closed the trunk and came around the side of the car, I suddenly heard her gasp and run back toward the side of the car with her hands cupped over her mouth. James, that's not an animal, just as I was passing her and could see just how visibly shaken she was. What are you talking about? I slowly approached the said animal, and I came to a dead stop in my steps to what I was looking at, and I was utterly speechless. The face was heavily deformed and looked as if it was in the middle of some kind of transformation. The other front leg of it had a fully grown head of a human, and that's when it turned its focus towards me, opening its eye, which had hair growing around the eyelids, but the nose and mouth of a woman. It began to cough a weak cough, and I swear it started to smile even as I started to back away. The teeth of it was also very much human-like. I noticed the long hair coming off from the back of its head and could see it started to drag itself across the road, even as it gasped for air. My wife Mandy began tugging at my arm and took me back to the driver's side door as she went around and got into the passenger side. I turned on the car and shined the lights right on it, and we sat there watching this thing drag itself into the bushes. We were so much in shock that I almost had forgotten I was in the driver's seat and had to snap myself out of it, and we drove off. For nearly 2 miles, we never said a word to each other. Mandy just sobbed and couldn't believe what we seen, and I was pretty much in denial myself. How could we even tell this to someone, and how would they even begin to believe what we saw? The only explanation I ever came up with was that it might have been a skinwalker. Maybe one that got hit by a car and was trying to change. I don't know, but this was one for the books that would have never been read, because even so, I'm still in denial about it, and so is Mandy. Some days, I wonder if it's still out there, but that bloody smile, human face with body of a canine still haunts my dreams, and I don't think it's going to leave me anytime soon. Janice sits across from her brother in a dark, dim-lit room by the window. She looks up at him as she wipes away tears, and he looks on silent, as he's always been throughout their entire childhood into adulthood. I don't know why you come now, Frank. You could have came on birthdays, anniversaries, mom and dad's funerals, and where were you? off doing your own thing as always. I had to take care of everything whole, you just... Wiping away her tears while her brother looks away, unbothered. I have 2 kids now. They're really beautiful. Yeah, you were an uncle and didn't even know it. I really wish you could have got to know them. My son reminds me a lot of you, though. He's there for his sister, but still has that kind of smart-ass attitude. Frank looks down and smirks as Janice lights a cigarette and leans back in her chair and lets her next set of tests fall down her face while looking at her brother. It hasn't been easy lately, but I try. I'm divorced and raising these kids on my own. I'd ask you to help, but I already know what the answer would be, knowing you. That part of you anyway. You would have liked him, and I'm sure they would have liked him, and I'm sure they would have liked to know their uncle. Frank smirks, nodding his head as he looks out the window, seeing the sun just about to rise. Frank, I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't try hard enough, but maybe it wasn't me, and I'm just accepting all the blame just to save yourself from even owning up to your own life's choices. Poor life choices. Poor life choices. Frank leans forward, crossing his fingers into one another while looking at Janice. I can't do this every time, Frank. One day this has got to stop, and you know that. I don't see why you just... Don't come back. This is harder on me than it is on you, Frank. I do my best, but maybe it's me who should be letting you go. Frank smiles a real smile and nods his head while leaning back in his own chair as he watches Janice stand up and extends her hand at Frank while sobbing. I can't come back anymore, Frank, 'cause I'm letting go. You understand, right? I have to move on, and so do you. Janice slowly begins to walk towards the charred black door frame and looks back at her brother sitting in the burned chair. Go home, Frank. We'll see each other again, I promise. Take care. Watching Frank stand up and walk towards the window as the sun begins to rise and the beams of light shine through his translucent body, Frank looks back at his sister one last time as Janice wipes away the last of her tears and watches her brother fade one last time. Goodbye, Frank. Janice slowly closes the door before peeling one last time into the room where her brother died in a deliberate house fire he had set 10 years ago. She wonders still as to why he did what he did, doesn't know the reason, or if it was an accident. All Janice knows is that Frank is now at rest after all the years she would come to visit him on his death anniversary and talk to his spirit in the very same spot. She let him go and freed herself from her guilt that was never hers in the first place. I had bought a huge patch of land with an old farm on it. The price was not a concern since all I had was money. Eventually, I took down the barns and shed, did the renovations myself, which took a year or so to do, added more rooms and a side to the house, which gives it a bigger look. I was satisfied with the whole thing, and once I knew I was completely finished, I had a party of maybe 10 friends come over. We had a BBK with plenty of drinks and loud music on the deck with cool lanterns. I was set for life and prepared to enjoy it. The land I purchased stretched past the tree line, which was maybe 100 meters both ways. Wasn't bad. Nighttime was relaxing, and sometimes, if the night is right, the moon would shine up the landscape so it's not as dark as it would be. My friends and I sat on the grass with lawn chairs where I had made a huge fire pit. The flames could be almost 10 feet. The view would be incredible. As we sat around the fire talking amongst each other, laughing with beer bottles clanking, I noticed one of my female friends looking hard over her shoulder towards the trees, and she points, "What's that over there?" I shrugged it off and told her it's probably one of the horses that got free from the farm down the road. It was a common thing, and they would be around to collect it, usually so we didn't take a second look. As we were laughing over ourselves, we heard a ear-piercing sound fill the air which sounded much louder than anything anyone here has ever heard, followed by the sound of galloping footsteps. I got my friends on the deck as I went to inspect just what was happening, and the sound of horses could be heard running around on my open area. One of my friends comes running with a few flashlights I'd stored in my shed, and 4 of us went to inspect what was happening. We found that the horses from the farm down the road were running in circles around my land, and it just didn't seem normal to me. One of my friends got knocked down as one was passing, and it was just chaos as we all ran around and seemed like they were just circling us. But that was far from what was really happening. After a few seconds of collecting what was going on and seeing these horses running in all directions, I see a pair of headlights coming down the road and running over onto the grass in our direction, and comes to a complete stop as we turn to see the horses running away from the car's lights. I see my neighbor step out from the car yelling at us, "Get in the house now!" I instruct my friends to run for the house as I ran up to my neighbor and asked him what's going on. He looks at me with a serious look in his eye. "You didn't see it yet, have ya?" I look at him confused. "See what?" He takes out his phone and turns on his Ring camera app, begins to play a video of his barn, and I'll be damned to say that what I seen was something out of a movie, a horror movie. The video showed restless horses in their stables, and suddenly all of them breaking out. Not sure how, but one after another. All but one after another. All but one made it out, and what came on the screen next was some kind of monster. It looked the size of a human being, but the eyes were glowing a white or yellowish shine. Another one came into view flapping its wings and closing them as it kind of hopped into view. What I can see was that these things had started to eat and tear away at one of my neighbor's horses, and when they were done, they went on and chased the others, which ended up on my land. We sat in the car as we seen a few horses run past. I, of course, was still in disbelief from the footage, obviously with my neighbor holding a shotgun. He went after the things and to gather up his horses, and I got out of the car and sprinted back towards my house. As I was just nearing the deck, I heard a scratching sound above my head, and with a panic I shined my flashlight upward, which was the stupidest move I could ever do, and there it was. The eyes were round and oval, just a bit wider than a human's, and there was what looked like no mouth. Head was like a heart shape, and the entire body was skinny, brown, and grayish, with its wings folded behind its back. Sitting perched and observing me like it was curious, I froze in fear, staring. At this thing with my light shined into its reflecting eyes, I quickly gathered myself together and ran inside as quick as I could, with all my friends gathering around me, asking what happened out there. I couldn't say a thing for a few minutes, 'cause I knew they sure as heck wouldn't believe a word I would say, since we were all kind of drunk from the beers. I told them that the horses just escaped and some wolves were chasing them, and of course they bought it, except for one of my friends. After that weekend, I hardly spoke to anyone for a few months, and did more work on the house, which it didn't need. I just wanted to keep myself busy, I guess. I got a text along with a picture with the words "I seen it too" under it, and I looked to see the very same thing I seen that night. My friend had taken a picture of the kitchen window, and this thing looked inside the house. Those eyes is what haunts me, 'cause when this thing looks at you dead on, you know it's thinking and has something of an intelligence to it, with a deep fear it gives off. Nothing has happened since then, and I sure hope it won't cause, if anything at all. I'll consider selling my land for cheap just so I don't have to see those eyes ever again.